Hey everybody, Derek here to bring another video for The Walking Dead Season 6. I'm still feeling a little under the weather, but I wanted to make some videos this week because I am on spring break and because there's a lot to talk about in the Walking Dead world after the last episode. And what I'd like to talk about in this video is Morgan and kind of predict what exactly he is doing at the end of episode 12 and what he is going to do with what he is making. If you are not caught up with The Walking Dead and you do not want to be spoiled in any way, then I would exit the video now and come back later, because otherwise you will be spoiled. Okay. So at the end of episode 12, while Rick and the group were out killing the Saviors, we saw that Morgan was back at Alexandria in the jail cell of Alexandria that they've been using as a jail, that room in that house. And he was working on something. I believe he was using a blowtorch, and he was basically using it on some metal poles, it looked like. And obviously, it makes you wonder, what is he doing? Obviously, he's constructing something, but what is it that he's constructing? Well, I think based on the past, with Season 6 and some of the circumstances with that location, I think it's pretty clear that he is building a jail cell, that he is strengthening the matter that the jail cell is constructed, because the way that they've been using it since, we've been introduced to it is that they've just been putting people in there, and they've let them roam around that room. They've tied some people up to prevent them from, going anywhere, like the wolf. But depending on the circumstances, there's not a lot of safety there. If somebody wants to get out, if they're able to get their knots loose, we saw with the wolf how he was able to get loose, and Jesus was able to escape the cell. So it's not a perfect setup. People can get out of it if they want to. And I think that what Morgan is doing is he is trying to strengthen the jail cell so that way nobody can get out like people have done in the past. Now, obviously, we may be wondering, well, why is he doing this and what is he intending to do with it? Well, I think it has a lot to do with Morgan's past. As we saw in episode 4, when he was brought to, Eastman, when he came to Eastman, Morgan was put in a cell that Eastman had constructed and was left in there and basically was, taken care of by Eastman. Eastman introduced him to Aikido. Excuse me. He was able to get him to calm down and then wanted to test him, to see if he had become better. And, of course, when he let Morgan out of the cell, Morgan tried to kill Eastman, but Eastman prevented that from happening. So the cell has a lot of significance for Morgan. And I think that what Morgan wants to do is set up something kind of like how Eastman had, where Morgan would, use that cell to put people in so that way he could, continue the legacy of Eastman, to continue the tradition, and to make the situation more secure, because I think that Morgan has learned from the past time that he did this with the wolf that particular setup was not ideal, that the wolf was able to get away because there was nothing that was keeping him there. But if the wolf was put behind the cell door and, wanted to attack Morgan, well, the bars would be in the way. And depending on whether they lock it or not, that's something else I was wondering, is Morgan going to do exactly what Eastman did and not lock the cell? Or is he going to lock the cell out of precaution for what's happened before? Because I believe that Eastman had lost the key or something like that. So I think that was the reason why he couldn't lock the cell. But I think that Morgan may have learned from past experiences that locking the cell is something that you have to do to prevent the person from getting out. But he may not. And with that, you wonder, well, what is Morgan going to use the jail cell for? And will he get a chance to use it? Because I could see a couple of scenarios going down. One would be that potentially Morgan may be constructing this cell for Rick. I think that as a result of the episodes coming up, I think that they're going to think that the Saviors have all been killed based on the circumstances. I think that Rick's group is under the impression that they have killed all of the Saviors, and as a result, what's going to end up happening is Rick and the group are going to go back to Alexandria thinking that the battle is won. And at this point, I think that Rick and Morgan are going to meet up. And I think that they're going to maybe have some kind of a discussion. And it makes me wonder if Morgan is going to lock Rick in that cell. Would that be very sound of him to do? I'm not sure. But, I think that Rick may be the person that Morgan intends to use that for. It's really hard to say, how Morgan feels about Rick because we haven't really had a lot of character interactions between the two. It's actually been pretty surprising. I would have thought that there would have been more interaction this season, but there really hasn't been. So we really don't know what Morgan's opinion is of Rick, but I think that Morgan is genuinely concerned with Rick and his, predisposition to kill. And we kind of saw that in episode 12 when Morgan talked with Rick and said, hey, we shouldn't kill. Why don't we just go and talk to them? We're a tough group. They're a tough group. Maybe we can work something out. Morgan obviously wanted to avoid violence if it was at all possible, but obviously the rest of the group did not agree with that. So I think that Morgan may have genuine concerns for Rick, and kind of like where Rick was kind of part of a stepping stone to help Morgan, I think there was a little bit of a push there. I don't think it obviously did the trick, but I think that, when you see Eastman and Morgan's relationship, I think that Morgan wants to, impart some of that belief onto Rick to try to get him to view a different path, a different perspective of the world. And it would not surprise me if Morgan would potentially trick Rick into the cell and maybe try to talk with him. And of course, I think Rick would probably get really mad, but that maybe Morgan might try to do that for Rick because, Morgan and Rick have a special relationship. And I think that if there's somebody in Alexandria or somebody in Morgan's life that he would want to help, it would be Rick. Now, this may have consequences. This might be used in the story, it might not. But I could see a scenario where Morgan does somehow get Rick into that cell and tries his best to, impart his knowledge on Rick. And of course, it might go badly. It might result in Morgan getting kicked out of the community. It might result in some terrible things. But, Morgan might be that desperate. If they think that, the war is done, they've done what they could, then maybe Morgan thinks, okay, well, now's the perfect time. There's nothing that's going to happen. I'm going to put Rick in the cell, and I'm going to try to, hold out as long as I can to make him agree. And when Rick agrees, he'll finally come out and say, hey, Morgan was right, and, we're going to follow a different path, and then Morgan won't get in trouble. So there could be a lot of different ideas that Morgan has about this, but one thing that may happen is something negative. I think that if Morgan does lock Rick in that cell, it might end up being bad for when the Saviors come back, because I think there's a very good likelihood that the Saviors will make a return appearance, because obviously Rick's group is not going to have killed all of them, and if the group's leader has gone missing, then the group might end up sustaining some casualties if Alexandria were to be attacked by the Saviors head on, which I think may happen. It does happen in the comic books, and I think it's very likely that we might see that happen, where the Saviors come to the walls of Alexandria and attack, and nobody can find Rick. And, Morgan might let him out. Morgan might keep it a secret. We don't know. But I think that if Morgan does follow through with that, it might be very scary, the consequences that result from it. Now, there is also a chance that Morgan may never get the chance to use it on Rick, or he doesn't have the intention to use it on Rick. It may be that Morgan believes that he can just talk to Rick and maybe present this idea of, hey, Rick, from here on out, we can do things differently. Here's a jail cell. Maybe, when we meet somebody later, we might use this jail cell for somebody. And Rick might agree, Rick might not agree. So it may be that Morgan never gets a chance to use it, and that maybe Morgan might end up dying in season 6. He might not. That's undetermined at this point, but I think it could go 50-50 either way. And one thing that I was thinking about was that this cell might end up playing a later role in the series. And this is an extra spoiler from the comic books for individuals that may not read the comics and might not know. This is some major information that you're about to hear. So if you don't want to hear it, I would also suggest that you exit the video, because it could spoil a lot of things coming up. Okay. So what this little tidbit is that in the comics, Rick and, the Saviors, Alexandria, the Hilltop, the Saviors, and a group called the Kingdom all go to war. It's just this effort to kill the Saviors, to defeat them. And Rick ends up, leading the battle that wins the war. And in a sense, he captures Negan instead of killing him. And basically states, no, we're not going to kill you. I'm better than that. I'm not going to do that to you. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock you up, and forever you're going to have to look out and see everybody else enjoying life, and you won't, because that's the way that the world has to work. And in the future of the comics, there's a time jump after the war of about 2 years. And Negan is still in this jail cell. And I think it's very possible that some of Morgan's teachings are going to rub off on Rick. Now, how Morgan approaches this, I'm not sure. Again, he might lock Rick in the cell, or, Morgan might suggest the idea. Morgan might die because of his beliefs, and Rick might want to honor that, to say, Morgan wasn't wrong. There is a future for us, not as violent, not full of killing, and we need to implement it now, and this is how we do it. And I think that maybe that might be how the cell is used, that it may just end up being used for Negan later on in the series. So it's hard to say, but I think that those are some likely outcomes of what Morgan is doing and what he might do with the cell, plus what the cell might be used for later. So I'll be very interested to see if Morgan's plans are acted upon and how they might affect the story in these last couple of episodes and into the future. So with that, I'm going to bring this video to a close. I want to thank all of you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, don't be afraid to leave them. Feel free to subscribe. I do have more videos coming. And if you have any suggestion for future videos that you would like to see, don't be afraid to suggest them. Have a very wonderful evening, and thank you very much for watching.